Phoena's Quest, Book 1, First Spark, by Chrissy Garwood. Chapter 13. The River Awakens. It was colder when Phoena awoke. She frowned at the fire. All that remained was a small pile of darkened coals nestled among the ashes. She shook herself and rubbed life into her numb legs. The small artificial sun still hovered near the ceiling. In response to her glance, it intensified its radiant heat. She smiled and the air grew warmer. She strolled around her cave. What should she do next? She didn't know how long she had slept and was reluctant to return to the magic mirror. She paused. Was she afraid that the vision would only reveal an empty dining hall? Or did she fear the mirror would show her one of the young men in the privacy of his chamber? She stopped pacing. Was there one lord over the others that she might hope to see? Chiding herself for entertaining thoughts above her station, she resumed her pacing. But what was her station? If Lord Westonbrook was her godfather, why had he not contacted her before? Did his appearance mean she wasn't an orphan? Did he know what had happened to her parents? And did she have any other relatives? There were too many questions, and no one to advise her. I have to go back. Phoena pictured herself standing in the reception room in the guest suite. Nothing happened. Did she need to concentrate on the faces of the people she wanted to meet? Lord Westonbrook was difficult to visualise, so she thought about Matron instead. Phoena remembered that woman's kindness when she had discovered the servant asleep outside her office. The memory was powerful, but it didn't change the maid's current situation. What am I doing wrong? Phoena ran to the mirror on the wall. She placed her hands upon the frame. Show me what to do. She peered into the reflective surface, but all she could see was her face, with the cavern behind her. Was that the wrong question? She tried phrase after phrase until her throat was sore. I'm thirsty. The ground shook and she fell to her knees. When she recovered, she could hear a rushing sound like water pouring into a kettle. Behind her, a stream of dark blue liquid poured from the wall at waist height. Phoena rushed over and dipped her hand into the flow. Her fingers tingled. Not ordinary water. She hesitated for a moment, but nothing further happened. She scooped the strange water into her mouth. It tasted sweet like honey, but after she had swallowed it, her throat burned as if it was on fire. The burning sensation lasted only a few minutes. Phoena drank some more. She lost her fear of the heat that awakened inside her, gulping the blue water until her thirst was quenched. She hugged herself with delight. A spontaneous song of praise rose from within her. She sang and danced with all her strength. This new freedom dispatched all her worries, until she stepped into ankle-deep water. Only then did she remember the fountain pouring from the wall. Where the small trickle had begun, there was now a gushing waterfall. The hole in the wall continued to widen. More and more water poured into her cave. Within minutes, the whole cavern floor was awash. What am I supposed to do? Could she block the hole? She tore off her apron and pushed the bundled fabric into the opening. At first this stemmed the flow, but then cracks appeared in the surrounding wall. A gaping hole opened in the cavern wall. A foaming wave of blue water knocked her off her feet. Carried along by the incoming breakers, she was unable to regain her balance. She smashed into the opposite wall. Everything went dim. When she awoke, she was floating beneath the water. Her chest was on fire. She still breathed, but it was water, not life-giving air that filled her lungs. Afraid that she was drowning, Phoena held her breath and pushed up towards the surface. Her long skirts wrapped around her legs. The waterlogged fabric made it impossible to rise. Phoena's struggle to remove the heavy overdress sent her spiralling down. The descent continued until her feet touched the submerged cavern floor. Frantically she pulled the garment over her head. It floated away on the current. Free of the cumbersome weight, she expected to rise. Instead, her feet stuck to the ground. Phoena looked up to where her golden globe still spun close to the ceiling. The surface of the water seemed so far away. Here on the bottom, increasing gloom enveloped her. Bending her knees, she dropped into a crouch and jumped as high as she could. Her efforts brought no more reward than if she were attempting to fly. When she dropped back to the floor, Phoena repeated the process again and again. Exhausted, she sat down, wrapping her arms around her knees. Tears threatened to overcome her. It was impossible to weep and hold her breath at the same time. A cry of woe escaped her. She swallowed a great mouthful of water, but something unexpected happened. Instead of suffocating, it was like taking a deep breath. She was breathing water as if it was life-giving air. Her whole body trembled. How could this be? The fire within her chest was back, but she felt lighter. She leapt to her feet. The sudden movement lifted her from the floor. After experimenting with different movements, Phoena discovered how to direct her progress. She put her hands above her head as if she were reaching for the ceiling. Next, she pushed with her legs. With unexpected speed, she flew upwards. When her head broke the surface, she was giddy with delight. She bobbed high above the water, close enough to the ceiling to touch it with her outstretched fingers. A moment later, she dropped back into the waves. Her golden light source hovered high above the swirling water. She wasn't conscious of summoning it, but the warm sphere flew at her. The orb spun around her head before plummeting under the waves. Phoena cried out, but instead of extinguishing, the magic light became transfused with silver. It changed from a glowing sun into a glistening moon. Now the waves around her shimmered with crystal brilliance. She ducked her head under the water. She could see a great distance in every direction. The silvery globe dropped deeper. She followed it down. The massive opening where the water entered was impossible to ignore. As she pushed herself towards it, she was only half aware that the silvery globe did not follow her. Phoena struggled against the surging torrent, making little progress. When she ceased her effort, the current took her back towards the globe. She turned from the water's source, and the globe moved with her. There on the further wall was a shiny oval shape. She drifted towards it. It must be the magic mirror. Were there shapes moving on the shimmering surface? When she arrived, The mirror's reflective surface swirled with mist. Her hands gripped the decorative frame to hold her in place beneath the waves. At first she saw nothing more. When the silvery moon floated nearer, a face appeared. She leaned closer. Was this her reflection? She pulled faces at the mirror. The maiden in the mirror responded with perfect synchronicity. What had changed since she last looked at herself in the mirror? She shook her head. Her hair floated around her head in long, glistening tendrils. Not only had it grown, but the colour had changed from a mousy brown to a richer black, like dark chocolate. This reminded her of the soil in the vegetable garden after heavy rain. Her dishwater grey eyes were now the colour of the water that surrounded her, indigo blue with shimmering silver highlights. But the greatest change of all was her upturned mouth. There was a joy in her expression that she had never seen before. She pressed her hand towards the mirror in wonder. She was beautiful. As soon as Phoena's hand touched the mirrored surface, there was a terrible shudder. She bounced back. The image in the mirror did the same. A massive crack divided the cavern wall from top to bottom. The rock wall crumbled before her. Jagged chunks of rock toppled inward. She put up her hands to defend herself. The sudden movement thrust her backwards through the water. She narrowly escaped the avalanche. An opening appeared where the wall had been. The water surged forward. For a moment, the mirror floated before her. Before she could catch it, the escaping water carried the magic object into the unknown. She dove after it. On the other side of the shattered wall, a violent churning replaced the silence of her cavern. She tumbled head over heels. Her thin petticoat drifted up over her head. She screamed while her hands wrestled with the fabric. As if in response, a thunderous roar erupted all around her. She could feel the powerful vibrations inside and out. A moment later, she was falling. Her silvery moon tumbled with her, suspended near her head. Her new surroundings were terrifying and breathtakingly beautiful. Her stream plummeted through the darkness to join a majestic underground river. When she hit the surface of the indigo waters, she plunged into the cold depths. A school of silvery fish flushed away in every direction. They swam and danced beneath the waves. Phoena longed to follow them. The water carried her onward at a furious pace. She had no choice but to surrender to it. When she had become accustomed to the speed, she took notice of her surroundings. The comforting silver moon floated nearby, bathing everything with a cool light. Wherever she looked, there was something new to see. Rounded boulders covered the river bottom. Some were massive, like a mansion, and others were small enough that she imagined she could pick them up in her arms. Here and there plants grew, their elongated leaves waving in the current. Phoena drifted. She tried to catalogue the profusion of living things that peeped out to stare at her silvery moon. The river teemed with a myriad of creatures. Many of these were unfamiliar, but she recognised some from her time as a scullery maid. Food was abundant here. She abandoned herself to the journey. After a time, the water lost some of its forcefulness. The current slowed to a more comfortable pace. Her silvery moon lessened in intensity. The water was no longer a uniform hue. Coloured streaks disrupted the cold darkness. Phoena propelled herself towards one of the lighter streaks. It was warmer here. The fish were larger, swimming lazily in a calmer current. They seemed more curious than afraid. One of them nibbled at her hair. She laughed and raised her hand. The fish flitted away, but loitered nearby. Something caught her attention. Was that the magic mirror floating nearby? Phoena moved towards it. The mirror drifted into her hand. She clutched it to her chest with both arms. Her eager movement sent her into a spin. This propelled her away from the calmer water into a stronger current. Before she could right herself, she was speeding along. Floating with her face towards the bottom, she watched the smooth rocks whiz past. On several occasions she cried out as she crashed against an obstruction. The water was merciless, lifting her around the boulders and propelling her onward. Then everything disappeared in a blinding flash of pain. Dear listening reader, I hope you have enjoyed this latest chapter from the first book in the Phoena's Quest trilogy. This is a beta copy, and the text may change between now and the official publication date. If you have any questions or suggestions that would make this chapter easier to read, please let me know. In return for your help, I will include your name in the acknowledgements as part of the reader team. Chrissy.